This week on Dig Me Out. With your hosts, Jason Zia and Tim Minichi.
Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. Join the union to vote on albums, pick one to discuss with us on the show, get access to bonus episodes, and our private Discord community. Keep the podcast ad-free and make the next episode happen by joining us at digmeoutpodcast.com. And Jay, on this episode, we are, in fact,
where are we going?
Relying on our union who voted for the album in this episode. Suggested via our website, digmeoutpodcast.com.
Right.
Suggested by one of our patrons. He snuck one in and it won. This one went down to a runoff. 9 albums entered, 2 albums left, then one more. So we had a special runoff election.
And this was suggested by Darren.
Yes. Well, let's go through all the records that were in the poll first, and then we'll tell you which one was Darren's. So we had the self-titled album, An Emotional Fish. That was suggested by Keith Miller. Stacked Up by Censor.
Wasn't it an Our Lady Peace record?
An Emotional Fish is You Can't Catch or something like that. Something like that.
They had an album title with a fish in it. I don't remember.
They're also REO Speedwagon, didn't they? You can tune a piano, but you can't tune a fish.
Oh, did they really? Yeah, you're right. Oh, that's awful.
That's like a bad dad joke as your album title. It's like something Greg Kinn would do. Anyway, Stacked Up by Censor was suggested by Gavin Reed. Rim Shot by Body Jar was suggested by Jason W. Independent Worm Saloon by the Butthole Surfers was suggested by Patrick Testa. Dope Sick by I Hate God was suggested by, I apologize for mispronouncing the name, Yevon Lishinkov. I totally probably butchered that. I apologize, Yev. Kyle Bittner suggested Curb by Nickelback. Willie Dillon suggested Number 4 by the Stone Temple Pilots. Eric Peterson suggested Crow Molly by Die Monster Die. And lastly, Darren, who won, suggested Hope is Important by Idlewild. Now, it tied originally with Stone Temple Pilots number 4 and went to a runoff. And then that runoff actually didn't end up being as close as I thought it was going to be. It ended up 59-41. Idlewild over Stone Temple Pilots. That was an interesting result. I thought Stone Temple Pilots would win that. I don't know how you felt.
Well, it's a band you would think we would have talked about,
which we have tangentially. We've covered Scott Weiland's solo album, and we've covered the talk show record, which was the other 3 guys from Stone Temple Pilots.
Right.
But we just haven't talked about the actual band.
And I guess if we're gonna do a STP album, that's probably the one that needs to be dug out.
Yeah, I don't think the first 2. I would dig out the third album, Tiny Music, because it was such a turn for them compared to the first 2 records.
Well, yeah, but it's the 4 is the lowest seller, correct? I would think.
Yeah, I mean, it still sold a decent amount of records.
Yeah.
I want to say at least 2 million, maybe. But I think it has sold pretty well. And that's the reunion, right? Like that's after they broke up. That's the record that they got back together.
Yeah.
From. Okay.
I think so. Yep.
So, but we are going to talk about Idlewild, who we've talked about before. Many, many years ago, we did 100 Broken Windows as a part of our, you could slip it in the backdoor 2000s episodes. If the album was from a band that recorded an album in the 90s, we would do a 2000s album. Nothing past 2000. That rule has ended since we're now do 2000s episodes.
Right. No more slipping in the back door.
No. The back door is closed for business. and we were checking out their debut. Now they had a release before Hope is Important, which came out. This came out in October of 1998. They released what's called a mini album at the beginning of the year. That was called Captain, and it had 6 tracks. But if you bought the Japanese version, it had 10 tracks. So that was released on a indie label called Deceptive Records, and then the debut Hope is Important was released on Food Records or Food label, which was the home of Blur at the time. And in fact, they opened for Blur when they signed to the label and started touring. I know, obviously, we know about Idlewild. Jay, have you spent much time with this before this podcast, or I had not?
Mm-mm. No,
I had started with 100 Broken Windows with them.
Yeah, I know 100 Broken Windows and the remote part, back to front.
Yeah.
I maybe sampled this at some point.
Yep, same.
But didn't know it very well.
It was one of those things where, you get into the band, there's MP3s in the early 2000s, you go to some torrent site or whatever to get it. And so I had the MP3s for this. And I do remember hearing it the first time and going, this is not the band that I like. And we'll get into that. But that was just a very cursory, opinion with one listen. Now, I like you, after the remote part, I fell off very quickly.
Me too. This was a band that I just loved for those 2 records. And then for whatever reason, I just lost track of. And they kept putting music out, but I just didn't reconnect. I was good with the 2 records that I had.
Well, they put out Warning Promises in 2005, which had been a 3-year break.
Maybe that's why.
Before or between records. And I remember hearing the lead single Love Steals Us from Loneliness and being like, that's okay. But it kind of reminded me of like how Our Lady Peace went from being a really interesting band to then becoming like much more simplified.
Yeah.
And I was like, not in love with that.
Yep.
So this album was produced by Paul Tipler. The next 2 were both Dave Aringa, who is the Manic Street Preachers producer in the 90s. He worked on like Everything Must Go and stuff like that.
Oh, okay.
And this was recorded over the span. So Food Records gets them, signs them, and says, we want you to put out a record, obviously. So they start recording in February, but they're like, we also want you to tour. So they would basically like go into the studio for a weekend, and then they would go out on tour for like a month or 2, and then be writing and whatnot. And then they would be like, get off tour. All right, go back into the studio, write 2 or 3 more songs, record 2 or 3 more songs. And that's how they did the first album, is just sort of like little breaks. I think they had 4 separate recording sessions while they were recording, to put this album together, because the label wanted them out touring. So yeah, it was they recorded in February and in April and in June, and then mixed the album in July. So that's not too bad. Especially when you're getting the album out by the end of the year. They got it out in October, so that's pretty good. Mixing it in July and having it out in October is pretty tight, actually, because you got to do album artwork and all the layout and get the pressings done and stuff. So I guess the CD pressing plants were in high gear at this point.
Yeah,
98,
but that's still a pretty quick turn. I mean, to get the mastering done, you would think that would take like a month or so.
Yeah,
getting all the artwork together, getting it ready for the press, and then probably a month or so to print and distribute. It's tight.
It's a quick turnaround. The lineup is, I believe that this is the like the lineup that they have going forward, which is Roddy Woomble on vocals. Guitar is Rod Jones. Bass is Bob Fairfowl. And drums is Colin Newton. On Captain, I guess it's the same lineup. There were some changes, I guess, before they actually started recording. Like there was a different. I'm not sure who was in at the original part. Oh, it was originally. Never mind. I can't find who it was. Any point being that's this is the lineup that we are familiar with. So it's all the. I thought that Robbie Womble played guitar too, but it's just one guitar player, which is interesting.
Hmm.
I'm guessing he's doing some overdubbing.
I remember him in the videos being more of a singer, but I thought they had two guitar players. But
well, they don't list it.
Yeah, it's a big guitar sound.
It certainly is. And let's get to some comments over at Patreon. Obviously, people voted for their own picks, and so like Kyle Bittner said he's going with his album, which was Nickelback. Gavin voted for his own suggestion. Chip said, I once said if I could only listen to one band for the rest of my life, it would be Idlewild, and they aren't even a favorite band of all time. I just feel like I never tire of their music. So Idlewild gets my vote. Who knew that Chip was this Idlewild super fan? Idlewild, Robin McCauley. All up there for Chip. Chip's got a lot of love of music to share.
I'm like that too.
And Jeremy Amen said, my votes go to two of the three most popular Nickelback, not Nickelback. He said, after video channels like the Jukebox brought a little attention to the Butthole Server's previous effort, I at least knew their name. The first song of theirs I ever heard was Who Was in My Room Last Night on a Concrete Corner sampler. I'll have to revisit the album to pass judgment, but it's definitely worthy of being dug out. I'm with Willie on STP's number 4. It does not deserve the hate shunning it received. Was it shunned? I mean, it's sold well. I've said negative things about the lead single because it sounded like new metal, but
yeah, that was my only really memory of it. Is just there was a lot of hype. They got back together, and then that first single dropped, and it was like, like they've been listening to the radio too much,
right?
Which Tiny Music, to your point, was very different, and it was kind of disappointing that they didn't continue down that more adventurous, divergent road.
Yeah, it definitely felt like they were writing for radio at that point.
Yeah.
Mike and Sound said, I remember seeing Censor when they toured that album at the Plymouth Barbican. Not many bands play that venue, so always appreciate the bands that played my local venue. Great gig as well. Great album also. The Key, Age of Panic, Switch, and Panic are great songs. And Richard Waterman went with Stone Temple Pilots. So there weren't a lot of people hyping up Idlewild, but it got the votes to get into the tie. And there weren't a lot of people talking about Idlewild there either. Keith Miller voted for it because was only vaguely familiar with Idlewild, so he wanted to hear something new. So that's good on Keith for keeping the spirit alive of Discovery.
Yeah,
here
it's hopefully one of the reasons people listen to this.
I hope so. Or for our charming banter.
I mean, other than validating your opinion of coming in, liking a record and hearing us say, yeah, you're right, it was good.
Right. Let's get into the album. Let's talk about Hope is Important by Idlewild. Jay, tell me what works for you.
Well, it's going to be hard to review this album and not compare it to what came later, which sounds like you are a lot more attached to. So I hear now on this record all the pieces and parts that make this band unique that I love on 100 Broken Windows and the remote part, which is, I think, this duality between a raw aggression. There's both in volume and energy and singing and tones. It can really get to an extreme terms of overall volume and sort of frenetic energy. But then that's balanced with this poetic side of the band. You hear it in the way that the phrasing is handled, a lot of the vocals. He does this technique, which I don't typically like, which is he finds lines and then kind of repeats them and changes them subtly. Maybe changes a word or emphasis or the melody a little bit, but they become super catchy, and they plant themselves in your brain. And it's the thing that you come back to. It's these little lines that he delivers. And usually rhythmically they're interesting too. So I think that's where I kind of am attaching this like almost poetry kind of analogy to the way that the phrases and the vocal melodies are handled. But when you mash the two together, this aggression with almost like a, reading from a poetry from a notebook kind of feel. It's a very unique kind of mashup of ideas. It has, you can hear it on this record. I think they perfect it on the records after, but it also has a really great use of dynamics. A lot of layering guitar tones. When they want to get big, they do some cool stuff with like dropping some heavy distortion on the bass or heavy distortion on the guitars. And kind of even taking that up a notch sometimes. It's really effective. It sounds kind of cut and pasty almost. It's very like surprising and a lot of contrast when it happens. You sort of get into these poetic phrases that might repeat, and then all of a sudden it's kind of mid-tempo-y or kind of laid back, and then all of a sudden, boom, they hit you with this big guitar distortion or bass distortion, and everything, the energy comes up, the sound opens up. There's also a lot of layering of vocals, different, and it's not just like harmonies, it's different styles of delivery, different types of voices, effects, small voices, and just his singing style also varies quite a bit. He can, especially on this record, there's some material here that's a little faster and punkier, and he gets into almost like this pop punk whiny voice, which is a little different. You don't hear him sing like that on the records after this. And then he can also get very kind of chesty and deeper and a little bit more weighty sounding. So you get a lot of variety too in the way the vocals are delivered and layered. And then as you get deeper into the record, you start to get some surprises, like a little piano drops in, some strings drop in, and you start to get the sense of, I think, what they do even more on the preceding records, which is really fill out the sound with more keyboards and more production in a way that doesn't sound like sterile. It actually still sounds incredibly creative because they're keeping all of the edge. So on Strings or on Safe and Sounds, these strings emerge through the track, but it's done in a way where it doesn't like become soft and too orchestrated because the guitars are still there. So those nasty kind of tones from the guitars are still over top of the string. So you get this really cool juxtaposition between, these new instruments coming in and contrasting sort of the gnarly tones of the guitars. So to me, that's what works on this record and continues to work for the band for the next couple records, which is, sounds really immediate, in the moment, raw aggression, sort of constructing these songs, with lots of distortion pedals and layering tones, but then also having this basis that's almost like a folky poet style vocal melody delivery underneath all of it is, I think, what makes the band unique. So that's what worked for me. How about you?
Well, I do need to say that when I listened to this back in the day, I didn't like the record.
Yep.
Primarily because of the way it starts. with a hardcore song, essentially. And I was like, oh, well, this is not the band I'm interested in. I'm interested in the band that does the weird angular guitar stuff, but somehow still makes it poppy and also has these really interesting lyrical ideas. And like you mentioned, the repetition, which kind of reminded me of like Davey Von Bolen from The Promise Ring. He would do that where he would like repeat a line, but then change how he was singing it when in the repetition. And the vocals are in some places very similar to what you get on 100 Broken Windows in the remote part. Like I'm Happy to Be Here Tonight has that second vocal that's like in the distance.
Yeah.
And it's sung slightly different. So it creates this weird juxtaposition between the main vocal and the backing vocal that it's not typical. And they do that a number of times, not just on this album, but they do it on throughout their albums. So it's like, it's a really interesting thing that I don't think that they created it, but maybe they must have heard it somewhere and thought, oh, that's a cool idea. Let's do it that way. What I hear this time, now listening with more critical ears, is you are hearing the DNA of this band and what they're to become. You hear the really good ideas that are in their sort of embryonic form here. And some of them are almost to the point where they could have been on that record, but there's just something off, like you said, there's a lot more of the screaming over the punkier songs, which I think Idea Track was the only one that had that.
Right. Which made such an impact on that record because it was just such a like big moment.
Exactly. Whereas here it loses that punch because you get it a number of times. But you do get what makes them interesting. There is the guitar stuff that's really cool, the big distorted bass stuff that you talked about, his vocal delivery, the songs. It's interesting because for the most part they're not oddly shaped in terms of like verse chorus, but there's something in the way that they stack those sections together that just makes them sound a little bit more interesting, and they can go on. And it doesn't feel like the song, it might be a 4-minute song, but because of the way that they maybe come to they might do like a verse, chorus, bridge, verse, bridge, chorus, they throw in, it's all the parts you would expect, but just in ways that you don't expect them. Yeah. And it keeps the songs interesting so that when you do have those repetitions happening, it doesn't sound, I guess, overdone, because the parts are moving fast in a lot of these.
Yeah, it's very efficient.
Yeah,
there's not a lot of messing around.
I mean, a lot of this record is 2 minutes, between 2 and 3 minutes, which is pretty.
It's very efficient for a second. I mean, they put on an EP, so they had a little time to develop this, but
right.
Still, for this early in their career, it's pretty impressive to get the songs down to their essence like this.
And I think, you hear their youth on this. I haven't listened to Captain in a long, long time. I'm sure it's probably a bit more aggressive like this is. But when you hear like a Film for the Future, you go, okay, I can kind of get like, this is maybe early Nirvana-ish, has that Bleach kind of sound to that rhythm.
Yeah.
But there's something else going on here too. And it's nice hearing them sort of take, stuff that are familiar with, but then are adding this new flavor, which is more poetic. I mean, I know there were comparisons to like REM back in the day, which I I don't know that I ever got that. To me, a lot of the guitar playing reminds me of like early manic, like Holy Bible manics, where
Yeah.
it's angular and these are not, some of these tones are like very dry and nasty sounding,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
on that album. Um, it's not a big like guitar album in the sense that like you can hear like, I don't, he's probably playing a Telecaster or a something like a small a wider body, not like a Les Paul. Like
Yeah.
this does not sound like, it sounds like a Fender through a twin reverb or something. Look at me throwing out names of amps and just...
No, I agree. Because the guitars are also very rhythmic and sort of lend themselves to more of a Telecaster or Fender sort of style playing. I think I'm happy to be here tonight, though. That you called out that song from the vocal.
The world is in my chaos dream, but I'm not invited. I said the world is in my chaos dream, but cause you don't know what people say, cause you don't know what people say, cause you don't know what people want to say. You're an abstract, I know boy, abstract, I know boy, cause you and me talk freely at night, and this is my chaos.
I do think that song sounds like REM.
Yeah, I think on this album the influences are clearer. When I was listening to the other two, 100 Broken Windows, I was going, well, I guess they're influenced by college rock, but I don't necessarily hear like super strong. But that song, you go, oh, okay. Yeah, I see where that early REM influence was coming from.
And it's more vocally than it is maybe Peter Buck guitar wise.
Yeah. There's probably a video with the guitar player from this band I need to look up and see if he's actually plays a Telecaster or not, see if I was close.
I think he might.
Interesting fact. So when I know we did a history of the band on the first episode, but Roddy Womble lived in the United States for a couple of years, and that's where he discovered bands like Pavement and stuff. He said he was born, I believe, in Ireland. I think maybe I might.
I thought they were Scottish
or Scotland. Sorry. Oh God, now I probably definitely.
Yeah,
but for some reason his family was here for like 3 years.
They're from Edinburgh, Scotland.
Okay, sorry. Apologies to the Scottish people. Please don't hurt me.
I caught him, folks.
Thank you for correcting me, sir. So that's where I think you hear like some of this American influence on the indie rock end of this sound, is like the Bleach, there's this, it's not that far off from some of the edgier post grunge, post hardcore stuff that was happening in the United States in the 90s, which is why I think we connected with it, because this didn't sound like a band from the UK.
No.
When you got in 2000, when you got that album, you're like, oh.
I mean, vocally maybe, but not the way that not the presentation. I think I'm trying to pinpoint. It might be like the drums and the overall like energy dynamic of the band too. Some of the guitars. But what hits as more American is maybe what's going on rhythmically. Feels more Nirvana, American punk, and like experimenting with. They start to get more into grooves here too and whatnot, but nothing about it rhythmically hits me as like what you would hear coming from the UK at the time.
No.
And just that layerings in that, some of that aggression is not something that I would associate with a UK band.
No, never. I don't even know that hardcore existed in the same way. I know there were punk bands in the UK, but hardcore seemed to be a very specific US, West Coast, East Coast kind of thing. And there was little scenes around the country, but very early 80s. And so hearing a UK band get influenced by that is interesting. What doesn't work for you on the record?
Well, I think we started to touch on it. You know, some of the songwriting here is not as developed as you get on 100 Broken Windows. You're starting to see the things come together. You know, there are some really strong songs on here, but there's some others that are, you know, just too basic, or ideas that aren't fully fleshed out, or too hardcore metal. That's another thing that, like, you know, there's some stuff on here there's moments where it sounds straight up like, if you just sampled it, like, oh, that's just a hardcore punk song, or that's just that might be a metal band, you know, and then all of a sudden it switches to something else. But you know, there's moments where that works. I think a Film for the Future is a good example where, you know, it gets pretty heavy, and I think it works well. But I'm with you, like, You've Lost Your Way it's too straight up the middle hardcore to me, and not bringing what this band does that's unique to them, by combining these different pieces together. And there's also some stuff where they do combine it together, and it also, like, isn't quite there. Like, You Don't Have the Heart has, like, the hook with the 9988776 has that kind of phrasing thing, but then musically it's a little basic. It's just alternating chords back and forth and switching to different parts. Close the Door, you can start to see some of the pieces there, but as a song, it's not incredibly strong. It's just not quite honed yet, you know, so.
There's still a little too much reliance on the loud, quiet thing, which is what I admired about the next record, is because they don't necessarily use that in the way that you would expect. Sometimes the loud part is the verse. And when they get to the chorus, they quiet down on 100 Broken Windows, which is a total inversion of the trope.
Yeah, I guess overall it's more predictable, which I would is another way of saying, like, they just haven't found the unique thing they do completely yet. They're getting close. They're like half a step away.
Yep.
What did more for you? Anything else?
So there are, along that same thought, or those same thoughts, his vocal is close to where I hear him fully understanding what he can do. Like, there's a part, it's just like one thing in When I Argue I See Shapes, he adds this little huh to the one line in the chorus, like being cute. And I'm like, you wouldn't have done that on 100 Broken Windows. There's no, like, making a little cute thing happen.
I'm not really sure of all this pressure. I'm never gonna lose any of my odd letters. They'll stay with me until I can't see that I'm no one. I'm not really sure of all this pressure. I'm never gonna lose any of my odd letters. I can't see that I'm no one. So don't fight it all, 'cause you'll be fine. Don't stop fighting it all, 'cause you'll be fine. 'Cause all you ever do is build it up inside. 'Cause all you ever do is build it up inside. I'm not really sure of all this pressure. I'm never gonna lose any of my old letters. They'll stay with me until I can't see, until I can't see that.
It felt like he was forcing something into that melody or into this chorus for some reason, but it doesn't really fit the vibe of the band or the song or anything. It's just this weird little hiccup that he does every time, and it grates on me when I hear it each time, because I'm like, I know you're better than that, buddy. You're better than that.
Did you get the whiny tone on some of the stuff that's more hardcore punky?
Yeah, it's a lot of nasally
Yeah.
stuff, which again, when you get it out of the blue once on 100 Broken Windows, you're like, oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
But here it's like 4 or 5 songs, and so it's not quite as novel as it should be.
Yeah.
Other than that, I mean, I think that it's the earlier effort. Some of the tones are a little bit harsher than I would like. The juxtaposition between loud and soft is so much that it becomes sort of bland, because I've heard a lot of bands do that. Again, what makes the next 2 records so interesting is the fact that they actually are able to come up with really unique ways to do things. But I think overall, like, there's a lot of interesting stuff. It's just not always in a complete song. Like, sometimes the verse is excellent, or there's a really great bridge or something like that. Or maybe even, I don't mind if the song's gonna be up tempo. I got no problem with that, but you just kind of like got to come up with this band is all about coming up with the thing that you're not expecting, but is simple. Like, it doesn't have to be complex.
Right.
But it's just it's a fast song, but you're playing a clean part there, and it sounds better than if it had been distorted. Okay. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
So, and that's just a maturing thing, and getting to spend, I'm sure they got to spend more time. I hope they got to spend more time than what they did in terms of pre-production, because it seemed like they banged that out pretty quickly.
And it's 2 years between albums, so
right. They recorded the next album between May and November of 1999. So they worked on it for a while, and they worked on part of it in the US at Electric Audio, where Steve Albini's, rest in peace, studio is.
Oh, nice.
And I think they had Bob Weston recorded a couple of the tracks there for the next record. So what's interesting is that it doesn't list who mastered the albums. It says, recording and producers, but neither of the records here say mastered by. Like, that's always mastered by Howie Weinberg. We always see that in records that we do. And at least for the first 2 albums, I don't know, maybe there's the fourth. Oh yeah, there we go. Mastered by Howie Weinberg.
There you go.
The remote part. There we go. I was missing my Howie Weinberg mention. Seriously.
That's funny.
He has 2,257 credits.
Holy shit.
As a mastering engineer. 21 Grammy Awards, 2 Juno Awards, 1 Mercury Prize. Howie Weinberg, everybody. We got to get him on the show. Howie, can we go through each of the albums that you've mastered, so we can go through the nuance of? We could just call it a Howie.
He's
cast.
like, I spent 2 days on this. I spent 2 days in this in 1994. I don't remember it.
Yeah. Tell us about how you adjusted the snare. How'd
you get that snare to pop without losing the low end? I don't.
Okay, we're off track here. Getting us back on track. I'm not surprised that this isn't the album that they broke it through on. I'm sure that the label wanted there to be a big single because they released 4 singles, but it makes sense that like 100 Broken Windows is kind of what broke them on a global scale. I mean, not like they were the biggest band in the world, but just in terms of us finding out about them in the United States.
Sure. Yeah, and timing was probably better then.
Right.
98's a little not right for this sound, at least in America on commercial mainstream radio.
And they released Everyone Says You're So Fragile as a single, which I'm like, I don't know that was the second single. First single was A Film for the Future. And then I'm a Message was a single.
This is what I mean. I think Everyone Says You're So Fragile is probably closer to what's on the radio in 98. This band is just not great at doing that style of music.
No.
Like, to me that almost sounds like a pop punk song.
Yeah.
You know, it's a little nasally. People, you know, if you don't know where the band's from or whatever, you could play it next to any of those bands that were starting to Blink-182 and all that stuff that was happening in the late 90s, and it would fit right in.
Yep. All right. We're the album, better EP, decent single. Where do you land?
Well, even though the whole album, I don't know that we mentioned this, the whole album is only 35 minutes.
That's true. Yeah.
12 songs, 35 minutes. So I'm still at an EP.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd be interesting to go back to the EP before this and see if you could put the two together and go up with a full album. But
mm-hmm.
I'm going to weed out the weaker material, and I'm left with A Film for the Future, Paint Nothing, When I Argue I See Shapes, I'm Happy to Be Here Tonight, I'm a Message, and Safe and Sound. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 song EP. How about you? Where you at?
Honestly, same. Those would be the songs I picked too. The rest of the stuff doesn't really work for me. So, but I think out of the 12, 6 is probably a fair commitment in terms of it's almost there. Now, I'd be curious if I had discovered this band on this record, like how my opinion would be different. You know, I might have a fondness for this record because it was the first one, sort of thing.
I know. I had the same thought as I was taking my notes. I was like, am I being fair to this record if I keep comparing it to what came after? And if I just took it at face value, would I think differently of it? I probably would like some of this stuff that's more straight up punk.
Yeah.
Just fun. I'd imagine myself having an ability to connect with it better had I not known what the band went on to do, and probably even heard some of the other stuff on this record. Like if you took the 6 songs that I didn't include and just made an EP out of that, I probably would still like it.
Right.
And find some interesting things to talk about. It's just everything's relative. So I'm like,
I think I figured out our problem. We need to be severed. You know, the TV show Severance, where they cut like everyone you're at work.
All context other than this record.
Yeah. So like when we go to our work mode, we would have no idea that we've ever heard Idlewild ever, right. And we would be experiencing this for the first time. And
well, we get to do that on the 80s metal podcast a lot because you don't, at least you do, because you don't know those records as well as we do. But
yes.
I feel like 1 out of 3 records we review now, though, that we don't know anything about the bands and haven't heard them. But
sure,
this is not one.
No, this is not. But that happens sometimes. So, that's 2 better EPs for us. And we want to thank everyone who voted in the polls and to Darren for suggesting this record. And I think it's time to tell you that if this episode brought back good memories, positive vibes, what the children say these days. Join us at digmeoutpodcast.com to explore our free archive of over 800 episodes, history of the band posts, and weekly new release roundups. Want more? Paid subscribers unlock bonus podcasts featuring episodes where we cover 70s, 80s, and aughts rock, new release reviews, and access to our private Discord server. Private. No Chili Peppers fans allowed. No, I'm just kidding.
Our forum immediately detects those, and
Yes,
our sophisticated AI just throws them in the trash.
It scans your hard drive for any songs about California or okay, just kidding.
We're gonna get.
I like Blood Sugar Sex Magic.
We're gonna get a bunch of Red Hot Chili Peppers albums now.
Oh, I know. I am legitimately surprised that we're not getting them jammed into every poll. Like, people are just not repeatedly suggesting.
Maybe we're not alone. I always feel weird because everybody I meet loves that band, and I'm like, sorry, I don't get it.
I just go, really? What's wrong with you? Why do you have such bad taste? No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Kidding. Everybody's taste is their own taste. I will not be curmudgeon.
This is true. Everybody's taste is their own taste.
You're allowed to like things.
It's very wise.
Like. Well, hope is important, Jay.
Nice. Yeah.
Well, and actually, I read a quote where the lead singer said that is either extremely profound or utterly nonsense, like just drivel. So you can take it how you want. And you can take Dig Me Out Podcast how you want. Look at that segue. And while you're there at digmeoutpodcast.com, you can suggest an album, just like this episode, that you think deserves to be on a future Dig Me Out podcast episode. So for Jay, I'm Tim. We're out, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Dig Me Out.